Welcome to episode 26 of the Hoop Threads podcast. I'm here with NBA Drafts Twitter superstar PD Webb. How's it going today, boss?
Wow, starting out early. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for being here. I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you coming on. Thank you for your time. Let's start at the beginning. So where did your love for basketball begin, and how have you adjusted how you view, cover, study the game?
I was raised in an LA basketball house, so on the gospel of Magic Johnson and to some degree Bill Walton. So I was always taught to look for the passer, look for the angles, and as the game has advanced into this pace and space, it's sort of the ideas of UCLA passing has really expanded into a quicker game, and so a lot of what I've taught has kind of come back into style. It was hard to watch the early to mid 2000 jab step fade away. And now we're in sort of like a beautiful game, but faster.
Yeah, the speed is picking up at every level for sure. So who is your audience? How has your target audience and writing style changed, since you started? And how long has it been since you got going?
Yeah, so I think that I've been writing for about a year. I think I put my first piece out like around Christmas last year.
Okay.
And this draft, cycle just ended basically, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I think my target audience is people who have some basketball background and want as much detail as possible about the idea of prospect development. I write mostly long pieces that are very detail oriented, trying to understand exactly what's going on. So if I'm right or wrong, or if something develops in an interesting way, we can have a broader base of what's actually true in development. How good can bad shooters become? For guys who struggle to pass out of combos, is that something that the NBA helps them develop? Does it happen in year 1? Does it happen in year 5? Does it happen in year 10? So getting as much catalog detail as possible and building some anecdotal evidence towards the greater theories of basketball development.
Next goes to kind of just your presence, I guess, on social media and in general, kind of your writing style. Like you're clearly an intelligent person and a hoop head. You're sarcastic, which I appreciate, but never condescending. Talk about that approach and if that how intentional that is, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's really intentional because I write mostly about people from the age of 15 to 22, and they're always a name search away. And I try to write about players in such a way that it's clear to them I'm writing about their games, and I'm writing about their games as an object in motion. So it's not, this guy is a bad jump shooter and he'll be a jump shooter forever. It's the jump shot is struggling, and I'd like to see these changes made. So that way, even if they name search and find something that they may not agree with, they can see that like I'm not trying to slam them or kill their career or anything like that. It's that like I see this as something that can be built upon. The other thing that kind of bothers me is that we have sort of a culture of talking down and punching down. Just people probably on the internet, and specifically basketball. There's a lot of like vague messages about kids not making it because of mixtapes and trainers, and there's not really that same energy when it comes to coaches, whether it be high school or AU or college, not developing people. And I think having a culture that's more informed on development and is able to look directly at the people who spend a day-to-day basis and say, okay, this kid came in, he couldn't shoot, regardless of what his mixtape said, and he left, he couldn't shoot. So is that a kid thing or is that a coach thing? And so trying to push conversations, again, it's really easy to just to say mean things. It's much more difficult to maybe lay out a case for not casting a 16-year-old as the villain in a story.
Got you. Kind of in that same vein, if you could have a basketball conversation with any guy, stats guy, coach guy, living or dead, kind of who do you model yourself after, and who would you really like to work with and just bounce ideas off of in the future?
I mean, Dean Smith feels like cheating because Dean Smith is kind of all those. Dean Smith, everybody kind of claims him as their guy. The stats guys are like, he was really cataloging these things early. The X's and O's guys, stole everything they could from him. he's a culture guy. I mean, the same can be said of sort of that golden era of college basketball coaches who created the Blue Bloods and Dynasty system. I'm obviously a huge Bill Walton fan, and in terms of current college coaches, I think Kelvin's probably the best thing going. We were talking before about the very simplistic work that he did to beat Beard's defensive rotations, yesterday. And that would definitely be a guy that I'd love to pick his brain on how he solves some of these things.
Gotcha. So when you're looking at a box score, what are you first looking for? And, what stats that, what box score stats or just, advanced metrics are overblown to you?
When I look at a box score, the first thing that I'll look at is total shots and total assists, because I want to get an idea of what the game looked like. Obviously, box scores, just regular box scores, have their flaws, as does everything.
Yeah.
But, if a team took 40 shots and one dude took 20, it's like, well, you kind of know what that game looked like. Regardless of how many assists he had, he had the rock in his hands all the time.
Yeah.
So, just trying to figure out as much as you can from that box score about, what the pace looked like, what the shot selection looked like. Things that are overrated. I mean, everything has its way it can be used. I struggle with all-in-ones, especially black box all-in-ones, because everything has, every model has its type of guy that it loves. And understanding where something has its flaws or its strengths is essential to having a conversation using that. And a lot of times, if you're just throwing, if there's a person who isn't particularly stat savvy and they're throwing an all-in-one, it's like, well, the top 5 players in this are, defense first guys who don't take mid-range jumpers. It's gonna be like, oh, those are the best players. It's like, well, not really. That's what this thinks that are the best by its own circumstances. And obviously that exists not without context. So I think that more important than what's good or bad stats, it's what's good or bad faith use of those particular stats.
Yeah, I had the Florida State associate head coach Stan Jones on last week, and he said stats are really interesting because you could use stats as far as losses of gaining of property and stuff, and say that Germany won the war, but Germany didn't win the war. They got busted up pretty bad. I thought that was an interesting analogy, but the point stands for sure. So take us through your the PD web, talk about your theory of that you've developed and what went into it and some of the aspects of it.
Yeah, so I really don't like rankings. I guess part of it comes from like spending a lot of time around high school basketball, and it was never explained to me what they meant. Like the number 5 player in America, does that mean today? Does that mean in a year from now? Does that mean in college? Does that mean at the end of time, when it's all said and done? And I always thought that, there's so much that goes into the idea of rankings that it sort of loses what the actual conversation's about. And all people say is like, oh, you have this guy 5? No, you should have him 7. It's like, well, why? Why are we doing it this way? This is the worst way to possibly do this in terms of having actual basketball conversations.
Yep.
So I tried to think of something that would make it so that those conversations wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be a way of saying you had this guy here and not here. Why? It's that it would sort of be self-evident, and then we could just get to the basketball. So I built this saying it's 8 different categories, and you take a wing prospect, and you say this is the thing that is keeping them from being the best version of themselves. And the 8 categories are field, tools, shooting, point of attack defense, off-ball defense, playmaking, dribbling, and their role. And then within that, if you're closer to the center, you're probably further along as a prospect. If you're farther away from the center, there's more than one thing going that's preventing you. And so to me, this made sense of both. You get to sort of look at all of these categories in the report, but you're also focusing on what is the issue with his shooting. What needs to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed, what exactly are we talking about? And that made more sense to me. That's a little bit more work, and my average report is, it has GIFs as film in there, but it runs between 30 and 50 pages generally for one guy. And I'm fine putting in that extra. I usually watch between 15 and 20 games of their draft eligible season, but I also believe in watching guys as long as possible. So like I've watched Melo since he was in 7th grade. Ant Edwards since he was like a freshman, the end of his freshman year of high school. So having that longitudinal exposure to guys allows you to kind of see through the context they have in college or overseas and understand that like they're a player who's in development.
Yep.
And, then sort of figuring out what it is that you're about. You asked, what my audience is. And I think that what I would like my audience to be at the end is people who have a more definite idea about what they believe about prospects.
I think it's also just not just that, but also their propensity, like if as far as watching them scouting past, the draft eligible year, to also see, between his freshman and senior, junior year, there was incredible growth in this area. So, you might be able to logically think that, he can make growth in a different area, based on his work ethic and based on, his acumen and how he picks up things and sorts through information. As far as picking which level the prospect goes in, is there like, statistical markers, like he needs this shooting percentage to be this high, or it's just kind of based off of what you see after watching that film?
The way that I do it is sort of how much effort I'd have to put in to try to convince myself they'll be an all-star. But to probably put it in a more direct way, it's how perfect do you think their circumstance would have to be to work out? Like I operate on the assumption that like there is a way to make every player very, very good. So if you have a guy who's a terrible shooter, I'm talking just like, Brandon Clark at at San Jose State level. Like you need to put him somewhere where he has a whole bunch of time off, where he, is exposed to a great shooting staff. He needs to also have, these ridiculous touch indicators, and he has to be willing to, turn his inverted shot put jumper into something entirely different. I'm like, that's a ton. Not every, like anybody who's worked with players will tell you that like, that's not something that happens to everybody. That might not even be a circumstance that happens to, the first 100 dudes. So Brandon Clark, if you were looking at him as a freshman in college, you'd be like, yeah, this is pretty unlikely. So I think that it's sort of the, how unlikely is it mathematically, but also like how much persuasion do you have to do of yourself to see that?
Like how hard is it to see them progressing to that level? Have you tweaked that at all as far as, is this originally what you had? Is there things that you're thinking about adding to it?
So I kind of wanted to keep it this way for at least a couple of years, just because the purpose of like doing it this way is to like, I like to wear my misses, around my neck. I think that it's like the thing that I kind of dislike most about covering the draft is that everyone feels like they can be embarrassed by their misses.
Yeah.
But it should be the opposite. Like your misses are what make you good at this, because you can be like, okay, so I thought Emmanuel Mudiay was going to be a superstar. I thought Emmanuel Mudiay was going to be a superstar because everything I heard about him, behind the scenes was that he was a dog, and that he was like the type of guy who would freak out after his losses, who would obsess over every single miss. And I put too much stock into it, and I also didn't realize how tough the adjustment was coming from overseas, and the high school experiences. And I focused on a small thing rather than seeing the bigger picture. And if I had hid that and been like, oh, people can't know that I, made a mistake in my job, like that's not what being bad at draft scouting is. Being bad at draft scouting is not learning anything when you make a mistake. It's not being like, I saw this wrong and I no longer do it that way. I've made an adjustment. It's a dialectic. You have thesis, antithesis, then synthesis, and that continues forever. It's not like you're right and you hide the misses until you have another miss, then you just hide again. Like you're consistently getting better in the same way that players are consistently getting better. They're exposed to something, they learn from it. They're exposed to something new, they learn from it.
Got you. Next question is, I heard you say that the handle is the hardest skill to improve. Talk about the difference between, Instagram handle and real life handle, and, the details of skill development that accelerate that learning curve, angles, foot placement, timing on the screens, reading hips, some of the more advanced stuff that you found, helps in the dribbling stuff. Because, you can do as much, between the legs, behind the back work as you want, but if you're not applying that, in games, as far as thinking 2 moves ahead, this guy's shading over this way, so I'm gonna hit him with one hard crossover and then go behind the back or something. You got what I'm saying? So talk about some of those details.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like when we say people have like an Instagram handle, it's that like it looks cool, but also it's not ever things you actually do in a game.
Mm.
Like very rarely is there an 8 dribble combo that leads to a layup. Great to work on your hand strength. Like it has its uses, but it's not. If you were to look through, a starting point guard or your starting point guards uh, games and looked at the moves that led them to layups in the half court, it would very rarely be the things that you see when you see the highlights of guys who can dribble. And part of that is that like I think that these combination moves aren't particularly valuable in prior perception in understanding where the body is, but they're also not good at spatial relationships. Like most of handle is getting where you want to. We've all seen the 43-year-old 5'7" point guard at the Y who can still like run an offense even though like he can't do two between the legs.
Yeah.
Just because he understands the angles and he understands where the defender is going to be and understands how to alter his hip height. He is capable of just getting you leaning the wrong way enough to sliver for 2 feet in the paint. And that's the things that if you believe that's the stuff that should be valued and handled, that's what the training should look like.
Yep.
It should be circumstances where you're like, okay, get to the paint. You have 3 defenders. Each one of them has one hand, or each one of them, is only going to push you this direction. You have to figure out which direction it is. So it should be, these varied challenges that replicate game challenges, but in ways that allows for consistent learning. And I think that's the difficulty that a lot of skill development has, is that like a lot of this stuff, if you want to work on it, kind of looks goofy. It isn't the things that I was raised with. I was raised with like the Soviet style. We all stand in a line and we dribble 100 times with our right hand and 100 times with our left hand, and we do around the waist, and that stuff works.
Yeah.
There's also the point where it doesn't translate because my hands are strong enough, because they're quick enough, but I can't really move that well because that's not what I've been working on. I don't have the ability to coordinate and sell my moves because that's not the sort of thing that I've been practicing.
Yeah, and one thing you touched on it real quick there too, as far as skill development goes, there's a difference between trainers that are rebounders versus people that are actively moving, and you get what I'm saying. Can you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody has a different style, and that for anyone that's looking for a trainer or a person to develop a person, it's a union between the kid, their family, the coach, whether it's AAU in high school, and the trainer themselves, and having a communication so that everybody's on the same page. Everybody may not have the same methods, but if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you always got. And so there has to be some sort of willingness to do something different. I don't think that people really get to be better as shooters just by shooting. There's clearly more happening. Otherwise, guys who go to the gym for 6 hours but still shoot 33%, like that wouldn't happen. So I think that if there's a real value in going up and getting shots, in between games or after a game. But for the learning phase, there has to be, some new types of drills, some new types of experimentation, so somebody can expand their comfort zone.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's being able to put in like reactive stuff in drills, as far as like you were saying, getting to the paint with the dribble. A coach being in the paint and moving one direction or the other, and you got to do a dribble combo going the other way. That stuff is just small details, but that helps make it more game applicable. So you said that feel is also teachable. It's one of the 8 elements, I guess, of your web. So how do you go about teaching it? What goes into that?
Okay, so I use the word feel rather than basketball IQ. I use them the same way, but IQ, there are a lot of guys who are extremely smart at basketball, who know the right read, who, if you said, okay, so we're hedging pick and roll, there's going to be a short roll, the weak side defender is coming up, what read do you make? And they'd be like, oh, if they're sprinting really hard, I throw it all the way cross court to the corner. If they're, kind of jogging, I can throw the short roll. You can find a lot of people who can do that, but they can't do it on a moment by moment basis. So you have a lot of young guys who know the answer, but they can't choose the exact moment. They can't navigate the controversy of that moment. And that's what feel is to me. Like that's the separation between the two. I think feel is teachable because you can replicate those moments. If somebody has problems with that exact circumstance, with they're the point guard and they're getting hard trapped or very hard hedged, and they have a short roll, and there's a loaded up defense on the weak side, like have a small sided game where it's that exact circumstance. Maybe the defense is moving around a little bit to get to that point, so that there's a continual read, throwing in variance within that circumstance. That will develop feel. But just explaining like, hey, if this guy's here, that guy's here, you make this pass or that pass, that isn't particularly helpful, because otherwise, like, every coach in America would be like, okay, in press breaks, get the ball middle, and then you'd never have to teach it ever again. And every coach in America will be like, you can explain it as many times as you like. You can use sock puppets. They're still not going to catch it, turn opposite, and throw an overhead pass. It's just because they still have to process it and understand that there are circumstances where they do that, and there are circumstances where you kind of do the opposite. And the only way to know is to do. So building small-sided games, whether it's 1-on-2s, 3-on-4s, 4-on-3s, in that exact circumstance, or the circumstance that's most common in your offense, is going to develop the feel for that moment. If feel wasn't developable, the first pick in every tryout would be the kid who's understands how to do everything, is the worst athlete. But it's often the opposite, because basketball coaches think they can teach basketball thinking and basketball feel. In fact, we often do the exact opposite. That guy's at the end of the bench, and the guy who can make plays and can sort of use his athleticism but doesn't quite understand what's happening yet, or maybe has like one skill and is still working on the rest of his game, is often the first guy that coaches pick.
Let's move real quick to a theory, in front office stuff, the Larry Bird theory, about that you said that they want to draft guys that are either like you or killed you, during your playing career. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've just noticed casually, and you'll find it in guys that played at a high level, where they generally just like one of two dudes. They're like guys that play just like them. One of my coaches was a scorer, probably averaged 30 plus in high school and in college, and he always liked scorers. Like, he just didn't. If you played defense, like, it was cool, but he didn't have a place in his heart. And then I had another coach that was like an undersized point guard, really crafty. And all his favorite players were just like these big, strong point guards that could beat everybody to spots, because that gave him problems. And I just feel like with it's a small theory. Like, it's obviously not enough to predict what people do, but just when watching guys who played at a high level, they seem to find these two types of dudes: the ones that gave them all the problems in the world, that they just don't want a team like. They want to get a team that nobody wants to play, or they want a team of guys that play a lot like them.
I want to read a quote from one of your pieces that I found, because the last line of it stumped me a little bit. A lot of big words in there, a lot of SAT words, my guy. So I said, growth is not linear. Player development is not linear. It's always a confluence of factors. Different things affect different things differently. NBA teams keep hiring and firing analysts, consultants, research firms, and algorithms because there's so much to be known. The relationship between the crispness of sets and shot value, or play calling optimization, and expected value of shots during 10-0 runs, because the info is buried in the tropisms of movement regarding relationships and tension, concepts big data has been trashed for. So my first question is that last part, because the info is buried in the tropisms of movement regarding relationships and tension. Unpack that for me.
Okay, yeah, I can make this pretty simple. A lot of what we know about basketball isn't observable. When you look at stats, it's like, when you go to the Y with like your older brother or cousin or whatever, and some old guy gets a layup and he goes, that's because he cut really well. He rubbed his guy right, like he's faked one way, he planted his foot, and he cut the other way. He got the ball right off the UCLA cut.
Yep.
That's tropism movement. Just means like how people move in a general direction. And those things, they're not alone. It's not that if you come off UCLA cuts well, you score. It's that, again, another coach thing. It's because we come off cuts well, the defense has to react, and that defense helping over to chuck the cutter is what allows us to hit the skip pass to the opposite side. Relationships and tension, because a person cut off the ball hard, the defense had to react, and then we get a skip pass. Any one of those things on their own isn't particularly valuable, but it's the intersection of those things that are. And when you give big data a lot of those things, when you just feed it, how did you get a 3 on this possession? It's not going to answer it, because it doesn't know that. So you have to use analytics, larger data within a set, but you also have to there is value to be gained from the big data, but you also have to recognize its limits.
Kind of a follow-up question to that. I hate finger rolls that don't use the backboard. That's just something that I can't stand. I also hate, I think I tweeted last night, Caleb Love did both of them. He came across the paint to do a floater, which I can't stand because it's really hard to adjust and make that shot. And then he also faded away on the layup attempt. I can't stand either one of those things, but I can't really mathematically prove it. At least, I don't have access to the advanced stats like that. So what do you need to see to put the data down when it comes to scoring and facilitating potential?
So I'm with you on the wrong way floater and wrong way layup.
Point guards love it. I don't know why.
I mean, I'm a point guard, and it's one of the things that I've labeled it pissing into the wind. Because sometimes it works, but oftentimes it's messy.
You're also not in position for the rebound. All right, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like again, when it works, it seems great. It's totally worth it. A lot of times it's just not. I think that stats are not granular enough, and tracking data is not granular enough that if you said, "Can you show me all of the wrong way layups where a person is fading historically?" Like in public data, you're probably not going to be able to get that. But what you can do is find people who have really good floaters but are bad at the rim, but they seem to make a lot of shots, and say, like, you could be this much better if you didn't take this shot. Find that like there are people who are suddenly bad at the rim because it's cataloged in Synergy or whatever semi-tracking service that you're using as a shot at the rim, because it's in that like 2 to 4 foot range that scares coaches a lot, because it's not a layup, but it's not a floater. And nobody really knows how to rebound them at a high school or like college level, to be honest.
Yep.
It's saying like, okay, you can probably find in the data and be like, I have you down for all of these layups. These are the layups you took this high school season, but this 2 to 4 foot range where you got to get weird and crafty is actually bad. So I think that it is good to recognize where the data is, because it's not going to tell you like, yeah, this is actually a 37% shot, which is a 3% worse than expected value for layups. But you can use what somewhat limited things are public data and work backwards from there and say, good finishers are here. You're here. This is a shot we think is bad. You're 5% worse than what these 10 Division I guards were. If you want to be a Division guard, you have to shoot better around the rim. We don't think this shot is good. Fix it.
Got you. Real quick, so we're gonna get to shooting in a second and some concepts with that, but I wanted to have you talk about your dunking rule with your players, because I was telling you a story about one of our guys that freshman year he was an imaginary dunker. It was barely get the ball over the rim, and it would kill fast breaks. And so I stopped practice one day and made him prove that he could dunk it, and he did not do that. Thankfully, he developed, and that's a big part of his game now. But talk about your rule.
So I'm a little bit of a nervous person, and so came up with a way of solving that when there's suspect kids on a fast break. So the way that we talk about it is that every kid has 3 dunks, 3 levels of dunking. The first one is the first time you get a dunk. It should be celebrated. It's great. That's one of the greatest feelings in the entire world, the first time you put one down. Second time is that you get one in a game. Again, feels amazing. There's video proof usually, like you're in a good place. For me, you're a dunker after the third one, which is when you can make 10 dunks in a row on command. Now, this might sound a little bit harsh if you are a person who can't get 10 dunks in a row. Because once you can, you will never have those worries again. Like as a coach or even like a teammate, once you've seen somebody put 10 down in a row, they can do it, because that 8, 9, 10 are tough on the legs. And every time we introduce this to our guys or to kids, or when I explain this, the kids who can't dunk hate it. They're like, that's awful. But once the second a kid gets that 10th dunk down, they are gatekeeping like crazy. You're not a real dunker. You can't even get 10 in a row. And there is a level of confidence that you get once you put that 10th one down. And to me, it separates guys who can do it with game legs. Because a lot of times it's like when you're fresh, you throw one off the throw one up high, it bounces perfect, you can put it down. But when you can do it with game legs, with everybody watching, understand there's there's some clout to be gained or lost if you can't get this done. To me, it's an effective barometer of guys especially younger guys in that space.
Hmm. To shooting, I heard a cool quote from Amber Nichols, kind of a concept for evaluating shooting that I hadn't really heard of before. Maybe it's popular and I just missed the boat. But she said on Nate Duncan's podcast that she watches a player's misses when she's evaluating shooting weighted almost as much as the actual numbers themselves. So, how are they missing the shot? Is it really bad? Is it hitting the side of the backboard? Is it, very short? Is it long? Or is it, these close misses? Is it rimming in and out? Just hits, the wrong side. Is that something you've heard? Do you agree with that at all or no?
Yeah. That's sort of how I evaluate people the first time I'm seeing them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the way that their misses look and how similar they are.
Gotcha.
So I am not like a super shooting traditionalist. I think that there are a lot of different things you can do within shooting to get to a good jumper.
Yep.
And I think that in a lot of ways it can be more difficult to force kids who are pretty good shooters into like a specific shooting framework because it can cause them to be not great shooters. Just because they're trying to do something that's extremely uncomfortable for them just because you believe it to be the best way to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I'm looking for from college and pro shooters is that their shot looks the same every time. So no different spin. If they miss, it's sort of on the same general trajectory. Is their follow through in the same spot? Is their release at the same spot? Do they jump the same height every time? If they're a guy who really like jumps when he shoots, does that jump look the same in the first quarter as it does in the fourth quarter? So a lot of times that tells me how a player misses, tells me what the most fragile component to their jumper is. Whether it's, how their guide hand places, if they're a thumber, if they don't have enough wrist torque, if they shoot with their shoulder only, if they don't use their legs, their misses can be a cue towards the easiest, or what I would call lowest hanging fruit on their shot, where if you fix this, they're actually a much better shooter, and it's usually pretty easy to do.
Okay. Got you. And kind of based off of that, you when we were talking about this the other day, you mentioned that, when you're fixing someone's jump shot, it has to be in a non-competitive space. You need 3 weeks out of season, which as a coach I can appreciate. But also you rebuild the legs first. Can you talk about what that process looks like for you? And if, like, when you say rebuild the legs, is that more foot placement, like the 1-2 step versus, hop, what are you going for there?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is understanding, like, shooting involves a lot of misses and involves a lot of uncomfortable misses. And I think it's obviously 3 weeks can be difficult to fit into people's schedules, especially if they're a year-round person who plays, AAU in front of college coaches. It can be really hard to find something.
Yep.
But the worst thing that can happen when you're rebuilding somebody's jumper is it gets unveiled too early. Mm-hmm. And then they attach to, maybe they shoot 8 jumpers in a game halfway through a rebuild, and now they're going to be jaded because maybe one of those went in. Now you're dealing with the psychic idea that, like, this isn't a great rebuild, where if it had just waited another week, maybe a couple more go in because, now we're shooting this way or we shoot the other way. Mm-hmm. The other reason is that you want to allow people to experiment in a place where they're not going to be punished for it. So I've definitely made adjustments to people's jumpers. And then, like, 2 weeks later, we came back and like, okay, actually, let's shoot off this finger because it's a little bit easier for you.
Gotcha.
Where if it had been a competitive, pressurized environment, maybe there was a college coach of that game, and suddenly maybe how fickle these things can be. Yeah. If you go 3 for 8 instead of 4 for 8, they may not think you're that good of a shooter. The world can turn on those little things. The reason I change the legs first when shooting is that it's a thing that is pretty universal. When you're doing training with high school or college guys, or with your own guys, like, there's other people involved in the process. So, if you're working with somebody who has a high school coach who believes in a certain way of shooting, you can generally change the legs and there's not going to be that much of an issue. Mm-hmm. So again, having that communication space between AAU, high school, college, and the kid and you allows for the best way of doing this. I'm a believer in hop shooting personally, but if a person's rhythm is more comfortable 1-2, it's 1-2. Once there is a dominant and consistent form in terms of feet, we can start to experiment out of, into different ways of doing it. So like there's going to be pin downs where hops are difficult. So we spend 5% of our shooting time on 1-2s out of those pin downs. Having different footworks is important. That's a lot of things. That's something that watching NBA shooting coaches comes out quite a bit, is just having that versatility within footwork patterns. For high schoolers, just generally getting them to do the same thing every time. And if you can get them there, then build. But teaching multiple footwork patterns can be difficult for, a sophomore in high school. I generally teach a tilt rather than feet to the rim. I think it makes more biomechanic sense to have your shoulder and hand pointed to the rim rather than 10 toes and have it be pointed slightly off. It allows, the elbow, the shoulder, and the fingertips to be in a direct alignment to the rim. The most important thing for me is generating power out of the posterior chain. So that's lower back, butt, thighs, and then down to the calves. A lot of times this just involves a lot of stretching, a lot of varied footwork patterns to get into shooting. We were talking before this, and Chip Engeland's videos are really hard to find. Like every coach can kind of, can understand, though, Googling Chip Engeland and going to YouTube and finding nothing. And like, this guy's the greatest shooting coach, but I can't find a single thing. And
maybe that's why.
Yeah, and it's like, well, maybe that's why. And I became a Philadelphia 76ers fan for about like a year and a half, because they were so crazy that crazy is the wrong word. They were so passionate about Joel Embiid that they recorded every second that he was on the floor. And he used to have like a 20-minute overlap when this would have been the back injury. No, this would have been the second foot injury, where he was out for 20 minutes when the fans were just let into the arena. And he and the shooting coach that they had was a Chip Engeland disciple. And because the fans wanted to see Joe so bad, they would videotape it. And so like every 2 days, there would be a 20-minute video of Chip Engeland's Chip Engeland's tree shooting done by a 7-footer. And I watched every single one of those, because it was the most exposure I'd ever had to like actual Chip Engeland drills. I mean, everybody has drills they will show to clinics or whatever, but just to see like the raw forms and see people experiment. Chip stuff is around now. You have like Dan Craig in Miami who has some similar things. Now that the brain drain has kind of gone out of San Antonio, a lot of the Warrior shooting coaches will use elements of it. But to see people do very footwork shooting and to try to getting your players to build footwork patterns into shooting. So like whether it's a lunge, then quickly going into a hop, a sidestep into a hop. You might not even necessarily have the ball in your hands or do a dribble into it, but just making uncomfortable patterns into your jumper, and with good footwork, with good balance, does a ton of work. I don't think form shooting, the hold the ball in your hand up to the shoulder, slow, I don't think that really works. Because the second that you have to give some motion to it, or the second that you have to, spin around or go around a screen or do a crossover, that stuff falls apart. So by starting with these leg combinations and starting with some self-organization principles, it builds a baseline so that whatever happens on top in time will get fixed, but they will be on balance. They'll get into the same legs every single time. They will have a defined footwork pattern. And that's a lot of the work for, a 16, 17, 18, 19-year-old jumper.
Yep. Absolutely. Let's talk about the college and, recruiting and just talking about fit. So you mentioned something the other day about, recruiting the local kids can actually be a bad thing for a college program. Talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be a fantastic thing when it works. Like LMU has when it rose up, did it on local kids. But they did it on kids who, went to USC and it didn't work out. It can be a dangerous thing for coaches because there's nothing a booster hates to see more than a kid who averaged 35 points a game at a local high school sitting on the bench behind a national kid and the team is losing.
Yeah.
That's a different type of sting. For players, it can be difficult to go through the struggles involved in college in front of the same people who've watched you only succeed. Because college is an extremely different environment with extremely different pressures. and being surrounded by the same people that helped you succeed in college may not be adequately prepared for the person that you need to be in college. It's not to say that everybody's circle has bad things. It's just that with a change in environment, you may also need, a new, fresh set of advice. So to have two sets of mentors rather than one. I think that in general, like college coaches, especially at like Power 5 levels, tend to avoid it. Like, there's not, a roster of full Atlanta dudes on Georgia. St. John's isn't, 12 New York City guys. And that's because you can lose your job if you take the wrong local kids, in the way that like if a kid from LA doesn't work out, at University of Miami, like there's not a local backlash to that. He can transfer somewhere else and he can work out. But if the guy who started at the local high school, struggles at the college, I mean, Penny Hardaway seems to be learning this lesson. There can be some issues. So I think that everybody has sort of backed away from this really romantic idea and sort of been like, when the fit's right, but for everyone involved, it doesn't seem to be as easy as it seems.
Talk about how society overrates level and conference. When high school kids are picking a program to advance themselves at the collegiate level. What should players be looking for in a program?
Okay, I'm gonna need like if you're a low major college coach, like maybe just like mute this for about 2 minutes. The only day that like if you are being recruited by like say like a Ken Palm, like bottom, like the bottom 30 teams in Division 1, and you're also being recruited by like the top 5 teams in Division 2. The only day that I would generally say that going to those Division 1 schools rather than those Division 2 schools is signing day. Because if you are the level of player who can get there, you're really used to winning, and you're really used to a culture of success. And those low major Division 1 jobs are rebuilding jobs, and not everybody is necessarily wired to rebuild a program on their back. It is also difficult if you are a guy who wants to be a pro. The tape that you're going to get at D2 is most likely better. Setting aside the like transferring up idea or anything like that, like at Division 2, you will have tape of you killing. And the difference between D1 and D2 is not so stark that 9 points a game for a very losing Division 1 program is not better to scouts in Venezuela or Spain or Portugal, Germany, than 26 points a game at a Division 2 is, and winning. So I think that it can always be difficult to say I'm not a Division 1 athlete, but this is a race. This isn't a race; it's a marathon. So a lot of the guys who go to those low major Division 1s do have struggles because maybe the facilities aren't the same as the Division 2. Not to say that it's a wonderful feeling to be a Division 1 athlete, but sometimes the fit, not just in terms of basketball, but in terms of understanding the campus, understanding the coaching staff, understanding how you're wired and what the things that are non-negotiable for you are, might be better at Division 2. So those are generally my favorite type of guys. The guys who are just on the edge of that Division 1, Division 2. I generally say that I would much rather go to a Division 2 and have my name on the leaderboard than go to a Division 1 and feel like I added 10 wins.
Or just be, the 12th guy on, a solid team. It's all about experience, but you also just have to project, how soon you're going to be able to play, whether that's, sometimes if parents and kids are honest with each other, it's really not until junior year or sophomore year that you're ready to go, especially if there are guys ahead of you. Let's talk, speaking of fit, you and a whole lot of people on Twitter are not a big fan of the fit and the offensive flow of my favorite team, North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Talk about what you would do, what offensive system you would put in place and what actions you'd like to run with UNC, and then also what rotations you would like to see given their current roster.
Oh, you didn't tell me this was going to be 5 hours. I think that the primary and secondary break makes sense. Like, I think that it works. I think that like Roy Williams is a fantastic coach. But to me, when I watch North Carolina, it seems that the worst shot that North Carolina can take is the one in between secondary offense and the flow offense. Um, and a lot of times, like there's fine shots to be available there, but if it's not primary or secondary break, where he wants to run the motion all the way through to find the best shot, which is a fine mentality. I don't necessarily think that he has the roster to continue to play two bigs.
Yep.
He has struggled to recruit shooting historically in the past 5 years, I'd say. Granted, the recruiting class that he brought in with Walker, with there's a focus on shooting from 5 different positions. I would like to see a floor that represents that. There's not really a great usage in having a center who can shoot from the volleyball line. If they're setting a cross screen for another big, that shooting gravity doesn't affect that way. I think that a modernization of the implications of shooting gravity, it would be like the biggest thing I would want out of Roy. So like the actions and the concepts work, but the spacing that flows in and out of them is the larger problem. So like you can take screen caps of Carolina games and see 3 or 4 guys in the paint on a possession. And
Jake in the paint, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, and the issue is that that's not just one out of context screen cap. It's that they came, 2 of those guys were on the high post, or one was in the high post, one was the low post. One is walking down from the top of the key, and the other one is walking in from the slot. Where if you had every one of them had been outside 3-point line, they come in for that one moment and then they keep moving. It would enable the point guards to work properly and work with a floor that does them favors. The Carolina offense is one that is very kind to bigs and wings in terms of their usage and in terms of their focus of the offense. Finding a way to leverage wing playmaking, which again has been the recruiting flaw of the Roy Williams here since the real one and done kick up has started. Is finding these playmaking 3s and 4s. It's one that is a system that Duke and Kentucky and the general blue bloods have adapted to, but it seems to be something Roy's holding out on.
As far as the jumbo guard that's initiating in addition to scoring.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think that they have to, they don't have to have the ball for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But having a slot pick and roll, you might have the traditional North Carolina secondary break, and then it flows into a jumbo guard pick and roll. Or, it flows into a 5-3 pick and roll where, your big is running the pick and roll, but it's a pop for your jumbo guard who then gets to attack.
Yeah.
These are things that can be done. And I think that they will hopefully be done in the next year or so. This class that they brought in is a multi-year class, so they're going to have time to make adjustments within it. I would like to see Roy bring in a challenging offensive coordinator, somebody who's willing to modernize these concepts and maybe do things that aren't comfortable for Roy Williams in terms of the locations of his guards. Or how much usage his wings can have other than spot up responsibility.
Yep. Let's move real quick to one of your favorite fit in this year's college class.
Yeah, it's actually a guy who would have really solved some of the problems we just talked about, and almost did, but instead chose to go to Stanford. That'd be Zaire Williams. You really couldn't pick a better fit for Zaire. 6'8", 6'9", shooting forward, has ball handling skills, but they're not necessarily you don't want him, running 1-4 flat. Like he couldn't do James Harden things with his handle right now, and he's also skinny. What do you do to combat that? When you have a sweet shooting, forward size player, you put them in a heavy motion offense, so the defenses can't gear up. So when they do get drives, they're much more clouded by the motion offenses that you come through, whether it's through flares, through zipper movements, through shovel actions. You have so many routes to deceive a defense so they can never gear up to challenge physically Zaire. So to me, he's in a circumstance where he gets to experiment as a player. He's in a place where he meets the qualifications, and now he can start to add a little more to his game as he understands the defenses as his body matures. And I think the fit for guys like him is to find a place where you can grow your game, not just do the thing they ask you to, but to have a mind towards the pros of being like, okay, so I'm going to need to shoot off the dribble. Is this a place that, if I can knock down open shots and I can knock down movement shots, will I get off the dribble shots? And Stanford has been more than willing to let him do that and to let their guards do that historically. Mm-hmm. So it's a great fit for what his strengths are, but it's also a great fit for hiding and then exploring his weaknesses.
Yeah, they get up a lot of threes, super efficient too, especially last year with Tyrell Terry. Let's talk about the draft. Your writing style is long form. I saw you say that you wrote 723 pages on this year's draft class, which had to be kind of depressing at some points.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point where I didn't know if it was going to end. I think the draft got pushed twice. Every time they're like, hey, the draft is this day, and I think I just tweeted, no, it's not. Because I thought that I was just going to have to keep going down and down the list. I think that I covered basically everybody I wanted to. I got the LaMelo Ball piece on the day of the draft.
Yeah.
But I got to everybody that I was really, really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Not just with writing, but with talking about it on podcasts and talking about it with scouts and stuff. This was the draft class. I would never like to do that level again in terms of it being that long. I didn't spend more time with James Wiseman.
Talk real quick about the minutia that goes into evaluating. We'll go through 3 different ones real quick, but a shooter. Talk about some of the things you're looking for on game film to show whether or not they're going to be successful at the next level.
Yeah. So I mean, with college, the first thing that I do when I start these breakdowns is I find, copies of all the games, and then I go find every stat I could find. So if with top prospects, it's really easy because I can go high school, circuit games, international games if they played them, and college. So rather than saying okay, they played 30 games, I'm suddenly looking at a sample of, 100, 120, 150, which allows me to see broader trends. If they're a guy who struggled to shoot as a sophomore in high school, and then by the time they're a freshman in college, there's a lot better. It's his strength level helped his shooting. His free throw rate was the same, and his free throw percentage was the same, but shooting threes obviously gets better as you get stronger.
Yep.
So the first thing I do is try to look at the broad stats and see what I think the flaws are going to be going in. I mean, I spent a lot of time watching basketball and watching stats around basketball. So I can kind of look at broad shooting stats and be okay, I think that he's going to have these problems. Synergy does a great job of breaking down shot profiles. So, if they take 60% of their shots off the dribble, it's okay, what's going on here that he has to shoot this many off the dribble threes?
Yep.
When I'm watching a guy, the first thing that I look for is, does everything look the same? You'll find with mediocre shooters that their misses look dramatically different than their makes. My ideal shooter is one that doesn't recognize that they've missed. Klay Thompson is probably the best wired shooter you'll ever see. It's not just the form, his wiring on his shots. I don't think he notices when he misses.
Yeah.
It just doesn't it cannot bother him.
Yeah.
I mean, the most that I've ever seen Klay truly get bothered is when he went on that crazy miss streak. And then he got absolutely flamethrower hot and started shouting, "I missed you" to his hand. That's the most actually bothered. But when you see mediocre, especially potential shooters in high school, they'll miss 5 threes and be upset. It's well, I mean, one, basketball is a failure sport. If misses bother you, it's going to be really hard to be a professional shooter.
Yeah.
But you can just see how guys are wired, because you need that to succeed in the pros. You need to be wired a certain way, and that eliminates streakiness. It eliminates making the math about you just being if you shoot your jumper and you're a good shooter, it shouldn't matter. So I'm looking for wiring, and I'm looking for, does everything look the same? And then once you've actually looked at the shots, is how do you get them? Are you a guy who can only shoot off movement? Are you a guy who takes a lot of stuff off the dribble and is a better shooter than the stats would say, just because they take really tough shots all the time? If they're taking tough shots all the time, is that because they are wired to take tough shots? Do they just like the challenge? Or do they need to take tough shots to be good? And one of those is totally fixable. If a guy just likes to take weird stuff, you can probably coach him out of that. If a guy can't get the level of separation that to his good games and his bad games, or just whether he makes a double clutch 17-footer over 2 people, that may not be. That's probably not a guy I'm interested in, because he can't get easy looks. Whenever I'm evaluating a prospect, the first thing I ask is, what can you do on an NBA floor simply? Can you get to the rim? Easy. Can you knock down jumpers? Easy. Can you defend multiple positions? Easy. And that's sort of the evaluation, is finding the thing that's done simplest.
Talk about the same thing for defending.
Yeah. So with defense, it starts with scheme. So if there's a scheme I'm not necessarily familiar with, I'll start with, this is usually college, though with high school, you can probably do the same for the high level programs, is I understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people who are casually into the draft, which is a fine thing to be into, may not understand the schematic specifics of what the coach is asking for. So if you were just dropped into the draft and watched like a Texas Tech game, you'd be like, wow, he's really pushing it. He's letting people get baselines. Like, no, that's the goal. Like, you're not, no middle ever. Baseline's totally fine. So whenever I'm evaluating defender, I try to make sure I have the tenets of the defense down. So I know, like, there's mistakes that always that are always there. You know, if you switch your feet and you allow somebody to get to their dominant hand, things like that, those are just universal. But the specifics of what the coaches are asking for allow me to understand what their schematic defensive responsibilities are. What I'm looking for is who gives them trouble, and how rare is that guy. Giannis is hard to guard. Almost nobody can do it. So if you struggle with Giannis, that's fine. But if like 5'10" dudes are like giving you work, there's a lot of those guys. You can find them extremely easily. So figuring out, you know, where can a guy get hid? What are his struggles? And then how necessary is his strengths and how hideable is his weaknesses. If you have a guy who's a great rotation defender, just we'll say Tyrese Halliburton, phenomenal rotation defender, just so good at it. He can't guard powerful people on ball. Luckily, we have an NBA where there's a bunch of 6'6" strong dudes. We can put him off ball and guard twos, the weakest position in the league, where he won't have to, you know, not be quick. He doesn't have to challenge ones, because in Sacramento specifically, De'Aaron can do that. And two is generally a softer position. And when it comes to wings, you can find a wing, because there's a lot of guys who want to make this Otto Porter Jr. money and are committed to sliding their feet and working on their body. So recognizing what the scheme is, recognizing what their strengths are and how valuable their strengths are and how coverable their weaknesses are generally what I'm looking for perimeter defenders.
Okay. Got you. Talk about the minutia. I'm gonna throw you a curveball that goes into pick and rolls, you know, coverage defensively, and then also offensively, how efficiently they're able to use them.
Yeah. So I'll start with bigs on defense. So I have a series that I did on pick and roll defense and bigs. It's called Slow Feet Don't Eat, and it takes the 8 major pick and roll coverages and then breaks for each of the 8 prospects that I did, breaks down their tape for each one of the coverages. So I think it's soft hedge, hard hedge, drop, ice, blitz, straight switch, and then like with a little soft switch if they're, you know, not a straight switch guy. The first thing is that you can how early they identify their coverage. In college, there's a lot of, you know, teams that are multiple in coverage. If the pick and rolls in the slot, we're in this. If the pick and roll rolls in the slot and it's this guy, we're in this. If the pick and rolls in the middle, we're in that. Once you watch 3 or 4 games, you generally know what a team is going to do on every single ball screen. So you want to see them declare their coverage early. You want to make sure that they are not making a coverage mistake. So if you're in ice and you let people middle, that's always a big problem, because the one rule is like, well, we can live with literally anything. You just can't let anybody middle ever. If what happens is that, you know, the side pick and roll happens and the big slide switches his feet and the guard, you know, is able to snake it back middle or cross back middle and get even like an okay looking floater, like that's a miss. So, you know, again, recognizing scheme, recognizing what they're being taught, and then just imagining from if you were to teach it to somebody, would you show them this? And then the last thing is physical limitations. So like I watched Obi Toppin for this series. I'm like, Obi Toppin can't jump while backpedaling. He needs to load. He needs to load up to jump explosively. He's extremely explosive when he has loading time. I mean, when he has time to load for an alley-oop, he can, you know, touch the square. But when he's backpedaling, he's not particularly athletic. So teams that put him in drop are going to always have to send an extra defender over top because he can't take away that lob threat at a high level. So when you recognize that limitation, and again, when you're in drop, there is no help over top. For the most part, most teams put that big on an island, and you have to be able to hedge between the guard driving and the lob over top at the same time, while the shooters gap, or while the help side defenders gap for shooters trying to get a deflection. That's a huge physical toll. And if your big can't do that, you probably can't play that coverage. For ball handlers in pick and roll, it's sort of the inverse. You need to recognize what coverage, right? If teams are hedging you and you don't recognize that you can split it, obviously there's a problem. If teams are icing and you don't have a way of getting middle, or if you're settling for baseline jumpers in ice, it's the inverse problem in that you need to be asking questions as a ball handler that defenses are extremely uncomfortable with. The process has to be correct, and the process is like teams will always give you stuff, and bad ball handlers think that they're doing a good job because they got a shot up. But good ball handlers are capable of making a defense uncomfortable within their coverage. And, that's what separates guys who are pros and guys who aren't, is the guys who are pros in the long term consistently ask those questions. Because as you get to higher and higher levels, whether it's the NBA, whether it's, being on a contending team in the NBA, being on a playoff team in the NBA, and then succeeding in the playoffs, like at each one of those, every little mistake hurts you more. And if you're a guy who can't make specific coverages paid, as you get to higher and higher levels, they'll just only give you that coverage. That's how we see guys who can't shoot, but also can't beat like double under coverage where the big and the guard both go under and just say like, shoot it, see what happens. If you can't beat that and you don't have counters to make that defense uncomfortable, there doesn't matter how athletic you are, because they can just do it without having to worry.
Got you. All right, you got something else?
No, that's it.
Okay, so when it comes to the draft, NBA GMs need to stop doing blank and they need to start doing blank.
When it comes to the draft, NBA teams need to stop picking scared. I'm a firm believer that if you pick a guy fourth or if you pick him seventh, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it'd be ideal to like trade down and get as many picks as possible. But like if you're good at the draft, like the relative value, obviously, like if you have, if you know a guy's gonna be super good and you get him at 60, like do that because then you can get even more good players. But worrying about these like minor differences, like if I were a team, I would have picked Patrick Williams first. That was my evaluation on Patrick Williams. Does that mean if I had him, if he was available at 4, I would have taken him? Absolutely. But like when push comes to shove, that was my evaluation on how good Pat could be. What like trusting your evaluation and being willing to take swings, because if you're right, like the difference between taking him first and fourth, it's most likely that like if you take him first, you're more likely to get fired if you're wrong than you are at fourth. Like it probably just it stings a little bit more.
Yep.
But that's about it. Because if you're right, like is somebody gonna be like, well, I mean, yeah, he was a Hall of Famer, but he got picked fourth. Like, it doesn't fundamentally matter. If you pick him first and he turns out to be great, if you pick him fourth and he turns out to be great. Like,
yeah.
The distance makes all of those the horse racing element of the draft pretty irrelevant. So I mean, like, well, I disagree with taking Jalen Smith at 10. Yep. I do appreciate that James Jones is like, I got guys, I evaluated. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, as a Cavs fan, watching them pick Okoro instead of Okongwu made me sad. Should I
love Isaac Okoro? I love Isaac Okoro
over Okongwu.
Yeah,
as a West Coast guy, I was surprised.
I think it's not at that point. It's about fit and asset allocation. I don't think you can chase all of the bigs they currently have with another big. Without like if you are picking Okongwu, you have to basically get off everybody that's currently there.
Yeah.
Which is like it's fine if you're willing to commit to that, but that doesn't seem like the process that they're in.
What process are they in?
Yeah, that leads to the second part. With Okoro, you get a guy who solves one of the biggest problems is that he plays defense and he wins basketball games. Those are the two things he's basically guaranteed to do. I think the shooting concern is overblown if you're willing to, use him as a 4 and short roll him and leverage his passing. If you're using him as a floor spacer, and sort of not willing to be creative schematically within his limitations, there's going to be problems. Like lineups with two bigs and him at the three are not going to turn out great.
Yep.
But
Though, like, because they don't have, like a crazy good playmaker too. Both of their guards are scoring guards, so I don't think it's a terrible.
yeah, I still think Kevin Porter Jr. is the best prospect on the Cavs. So
you know what? I don't know if I would agree, but that's not a crazy take to me.
No, I mean, but again, the way that I perceive value is that like wing, if you have a choice between wing and X doesn't do like something at an all NBA level, you generally just take the wing. All things being equal, you take the wing. So yeah, free Kevin Porter, and you try and give him the keys and put a Congo next to him, or put a Crow next to him, and let's just have some fun.
He kind of KPG kind of reminds me of KPJ rather. He reminds me of a little bit of he just got traded from the Suns. What's his name? Kelly Oubre.
In terms of like how they kick it, or in terms of like the handle weirdness.
That and just kind of their long-term fit. They're just a scorer, just a bucket guy off the bench, and I don't know if there's anything else that they're gonna be, but I'm fine with them being just that.
Yeah, I just think that that KPJ has his ability to like make things happen is a different tier than Kelly's. Like Kelly isn't going to be able to like shimmy to manipulate a big and then hit across to get up to a screen. I think that KPJ has a higher ceiling, but Kelly being an off-ball guy stabilizes his value because you can always just like get him to slash and attack the rim, where like KPJ kind of needs to be on ball to make the best version of him happen. So there's some difficulty. Again, the Cavs are in sort of a precarious but fascinating situation.
They have all the contracts to do something. It's just they haven't done anything. I don't understand it. Anyways, so favorite fit in the NBA draft, and let's go real quick to the next one after that.
Desmond Bane to the Grizzlies.
Love it.
He's built like a linebacker. He's the best shooter in college last year. He's the best shooter in this draft. He's more than the best shooter in college last year. Extreme versatility. He's going to be able to provide like a different type of defense communication. He might be one of the better passers in this draft as well. If you're sort of thinking of a guy you want to pair with Ja, this is about as good of an off guard as you could find. He doesn't have insane measurables. If he had 3 more inches of wingspan or was a couple inches taller, he's easily going in the lottery. I think the value play for him being in the lottery still makes a lot of sense to me. But this is the sort of pick that you want to raise the ceiling of and the floor of a potential playoff team. So it's not just that you got a guy like this at 30, but you got the guy who fits best for your team and for the vision of your team, both today and the version that makes the playoffs at 30.
Yeah, my friend is a Dallas Mavericks fan, and so he was praying for him, and one pick right before just got snaked. So what player is going to come out of this draft that's going to make teams regret not drafting him, a la Isaiah Thomas, Draymond?
I'd say Tyrese Maxey at 21 to Philly.
Love it.
Maxey is one of the guys that if you only look at college stats, you probably like, he got drafted in the 20s. But when you look at his historical stats, his high school and his AAU, you look at the shooting percentage at Kentucky, like that was a small number of games that he's played. This was a guy who can really, really, really provide value for the Sixers. He fell into a pretty wonderful spot. He finishes like crazy. I mean, my favorite highlight of probably this entire draft cycle is him catching the ball on offensive rim at like the free throw line, taking one dribble and going chest to chest with, I believe it's a Mississippi State center, and the dude bouncing back about 6 feet and Maxey just flipping in the layup. He's a great point of attack defender. Again, built strong, long arms, touch at the free throw line, and touch at the free throw line, floater touch. I think that the shooting has some small adjustments that need to be made, but generally you just buy this guy. And then the other thing with him is that he's just wired to be a professional basketball player. Guys who take and make the shots that he takes and makes with the attitude he takes and makes them are dudes that I generally want. And when you get that with the rest of the package, is just somebody to me who seems built to overperform their draft slot.
Yep. Another quick one. The jury is still out on this, blank on this draft pick from, the last couple of years.
Wendell Carter Jr.
Hmm.
Speaking of the Chicago Bulls, sort of had a strange year at Duke when had Bagley sort of unexpectedly show up. The fit wasn't magical. Then didn't really get the playmaking responsibility he needed in Chicago during his time there. Hasn't really been treated as like a big with skills. Instead, he's sort of been like a glue guy. And I think that there is a lot of positional flexibility where he can present problems that less mobile fives can't handle, and he can present strength that thinner like wing fours are incapable of doing. And I still think he shoots. So I would say Wendell Carter is somebody that I would buy that has had a less than ideal first couple of years, but is capable of blooming now that Chicago is in a better place coach and front office wise.
The coaching was interesting, to say the least. All right, so you told me that the Detroit Pistons current situation makes little sense to you. So we talked about doing an exercise where you redraft the 2020 draft for them, run their free agency, and you tell me what you're looking for in the next 2 or 3 years, because it's easy to be a critic. It's a lot more difficult to kind of fill in the spaces. So what you got?
Okay, so I think that my difficulty with the Pistons is that I love their first pick. And I thought that this was like taking Killian Hayes at 7. Killian Hayes is a wonderful guard. He gets the D'Angelo Russell comparison, which is kind of outdated because that comparison comes from his year prior when he wasn't as physically developed, where he had to take a lot more of the craft finishes. And then this most recent year at Ulm, he developed the ability to blow by people. He added explosiveness in and out of his moves, and sort of extended beyond that idea. And so at 7, like this would be exactly what I would do. I was like, yes, Detroit is on the right pathway. They get sort of seen as a forgotten franchise.
Yep.
And then they took Isaiah Stewart at 16. I don't get it. Isaiah Stewart is like an extremely hardworking, long-limbed big who eventually like will shoot, but he's a straight center who you can only play in some pick and roll coverages. It doesn't really make sense with the bigs that are currently on their roster, but it also doesn't necessarily align with like the visions of the modern NBA. Especially like with guys like Alexei Pokashevsky, Precious Achua, Tyrese Maxey. Like there are a bunch of interesting fits for a rebuilding team. Like you don't necessarily have to go win now or best fit as a team that is working on rebuilding, but to take guys that you believe could be on the next playoff Pistons team.
Who would you
I would take Poku. Just because like there's not expectations, so you can slow play him, and because he's also your second first round pick, there's even more of an ability to play him in the G League, play him situational minutes with lineups that make sense and that allow him to fit a certain role as he loses his sort of lost year of development while adding strength. Like to me, that made a lot of sense. He also would be another playmaker. This roster, which we'll get to free agency, doesn't necessarily have a lot of decision makers on it outside of Blake and Killian.
Yep.
So to add, a incisive passer who can make something out of nothing does make sense for the roster of bigs that they did add going forward. So to me, that makes sense. I mean, it's probably going to seem like a little bit of a reach to put him on at that point.
Okay.
To some people, but I'm also again more willing to make mistakes, and when in doubt, you take the wing.
Yep.
Next we got Sadiq at 19.
Yep.
I think Sadiq's fine. My concern is that he's a 4 to me. And if you're going to play him higher up the rotation, so a 3, or I mean, they might even put him in 2 in some lineups, just based on how big this team is. Is that he doesn't necessarily have the foot speed. And he was put in a system where he was able to always have coverage, and NBA teams are going to be able to put him on islands. That's not necessarily conducive to this particular team, which like Blake is not going to protect you at the rim. So while his shooting is extraordinarily helpful, again, he's not a ball handler or a versatile three.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go like the build route, you have RJ Hampton, who's an athlete, a guy who will sprint the lane, offers both top shelf athleticism and the idea of like he can be an off ball too, and you sort of have a skill focused guy in Killian, and then you have like just a all gas no brakes guy in RJ Hampton. That would be interesting. Maxey was still on the board. You could get even more playmaking, go Malachi, or you could just get Desmond Bain and get it grown up. Like there was a ton of versatility to this pick. Sadiq is, I would say, it's a fine pick. It's a little bit uninspired. He's also on the much older side. I think he's 22.
Yep.
Plus at this point, he may be 22 and like a half. So if the next best Pistons team is, in 3 or 4 years or 5 years, you didn't really get any value out of him in terms of the first contract, and his best years may be spent on teams that win like 30 games.
Gotcha. And then I think they had one more pick. Or do you?
Yeah, they picked Saban Lee at 38.
Yeah,
Saban Lee is sort of the idea of RJ Hampton, like in terms of like the idea of you pair Killian with like a nuts athlete.
Yep.
Yeah, off ball. Saban Lee got to the cup, and he like. I think it's interesting, like this sort of pairing that you have this pick and roll guy who can manipulate a defense, and if there is a bad rotation, you swing it to a guy like Saban Lee. You can really get there without a problem and take advantage of it. This draft doesn't really have defensive wings, so normally this would be a circumstance where in between 35 and 50, there's guys who couldn't quite put it together but have like a tool or two.
Yep.
Most of those guys got moved up just because of the importance of wings.
Yep.
And the relative scarcity in the draft. Everybody wants wings. There weren't particularly wings, so the ones that were there got way up high. Robert Woodard is, I guess, like the one that would fit in that traditional mold. Again, Saban Lee is a good pick who I like, but there's not stash guys just based on the alignments of the seasons. A lot of the stash guys who would have got picked. Get the promises they wanted and return it back, a week before the draft, basically.
Yeah.
Jemias Ramsey is a shooter, but I don't think that's necessarily what the team needs. I still think Trey Jones could be an NBA point guard, but I understand not necessarily wanting to split those reps with Killian immediately. So yeah, I mean, Saban Lee is fine. I think the draft isn't. This is, I would say, a generally unimaginative draft outside of the Stewart pick.
Yep.
But like it seems competent. That wasn't the eyebrow raising thing.
Well, what was the eyebrow raising thing?
Yeah, the rest of the roster is big men. They got it all big. Like I don't even think there's a way to fix. Like you could go through and like I guess say, oh, I would offer this person this, but like an important thing for young guys is having a roster that like. It doesn't have to be the roster that will be the next playoff team. Yep. But everybody has to fit the archetypes that you're looking for. So like your center could be a shooting center who doesn't necessarily like perform as well as you need him to, but he's a lesser version of the guy that you're looking for the vision of how you want to play basketball. And it creates a developmental synergy if you have multiple young guys where they're playing in their role them to, and they're developing, making the right decisions at the same time, and you can align them to like get real meaningful reps in the right way and making the right reads, even if you don't have the best players around them. Yep. And the Pistons kind of can't do that for Sekou or for Killian. Like obviously this matters more with guards and wings than bigs, just because they have an outsized decision-making process. Yep. But yeah, the rest of this roster it doesn't really make sense to me. I guess like they really believe in John and Musa, who loves to score the basketball. Loves to attempt to score the basketball. That's probably closer.
I don't know how you feel about this take, but I actually don't think that Jeremy Grant and Blake Griffin is a terrible combo. It's an expensive combo. But I think, the only thing that is kind of missing is Jeremy isn't a huge shot blocker. But I think having that mobility, at those spots, with those two, I don't know even who else would start. Probably Killian and maybe Sekou with like DeLon Wright to add in some shooting. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they'd fill the rest of the roster out. But yeah, it's
and that's what separates like bad developmental teams and good developmental teams. It's like you can have synergistic pairings, but finding like a 3-man lineup or a 4-man lineup, much less a 5-man lineup that you can get to, that unlocks everybody. Like I agree that like Blake's passing plus Jeremy's cutting is good, but they don't have 3 other guys that make perfect sense. Because like even Killian, who's a good shooter off the dribble, but currently has a struggle with catch and shoot, just based on how his form works right now. You don't. That's not a natural pairing because it's going to limit the cutting angles for Jeremy. So it's difficult to get an alignment that can get the guys that you just like in theory based your franchise around into the places where they can develop as basketball players. And man, that's a frustrating process.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is, some of the guys that they'd sign that don't really fit could maybe be used as trade pieces to bring in, young shooters and maybe some picks. I mean, they have a lot.
The worst part is they had young shooters available on the board and they chose not to take them. Desmond Bane was available twice.
Yeah, that does sting a little bit. All right, less in-depth version, the same question. What would you do if you're the Rockets GM?
First of all, Tillman Fertitta has a money problem. He doesn't have any. And I don't think that he can sell both of them, which would be like the general idea here is like when things really don't work, which like it seems to think we've done in Houston, you have to flip everything for assets. They just owe so much out of the Westbrook trade. And in a world where the NBA has to sell tickets, like you can't sell both of them and put out a bad team because like Tillman needs that gate income. He needs to sell it to sponsors and if you have 0 stars and like whatever young pieces a Russ or Harden trade can bring you, like that might not sell enough tickets to save his team, which the NBA doesn't want. It really, really doesn't want Houston to go belly up. So I'm going to say that you deal with whatever people are going to throw at you and you try to run it back because I don't really see another option. You just batten down the hatches. You deactivate Twitter. You just don't, whatever people are saying about you.
No burners, deactivate the Twitter.
Yeah, just the internet, what's that? Never heard of it. And you run it back. It's 17 new games. You just do whatever you can.
Underrated signing. They did get Christian Wood.
A player I love. In a normal circumstance, he would be the best player on the Rockets next year. But this is not a normal circumstance because of his money problems. So
I also like Bruno Caboclo too. Personally, I'm a big fan of him since his G League days. All right, let's get to the next question, and then we'll close it out here. So, what's the next big trend for NBA basketball? You got a good one?
Yeah. So I really enjoy watching ripple effects. Usually, you can find it just by exasperated scouts and parents being like, "This guy ruined the game." Like when Steph had his first breakout year, and every kid in America was chucking deep threes. And there's, the first 2 years of outrage where like, a 6-year-old tries to do it and people get mad. And after that, it helps the game. Like after that, people incorporate it and you get, actual prospects and people who've grown up on the warped gravity and understanding how that works. You get them into the system. And I think that we are going to have a generation of young big guys who watched a Denver Nuggets basketball game and texted their coach and parents and said, "Why can't I get to run offense at the high post? Like, why don't I get to make these passes out of split cuts?" So I think that we have a generation of young guys who are willing to pick and roll and want to dunk on people, but also would like to, make touch passes, or if they're not being covered, they can, pump fake if the big doesn't respect it, they get to shoot. Putting centers as, if not the primary usage in it for a team have lineups where they're expected to carry the usage of an offense. So I don't think that it's going to be next year, but I think in the next 5 to 10 years, that's the groundswell of talented bigs we're going to have is people who understand that 3 is greater than 2, and also have watched Jokic and Embiid and been like, oh yeah, I can do some of these things, and let's build an offense where I'm allowed to.
I thought that was one of the craziest trends of the draft was the amount of bigs drafted in the first round. That was surprising to me, especially with a bunch of good guard and combo talent available. All right, so the last thing is I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask me a question.
Yeah, and so now that this draft's over and college basketball started, I like to let games pile up. I'll watch the game of the moment. Because I can't stop watching basketball, but I don't necessarily want to break it down because I like to deal with bigger sample sizes. So I've been going back to high school, and I wanted to ask you, staying away from the home squad, because I know you guys got some guys, but I know all those guys, so I need some names that maybe I couldn't get immediately. The real on the ground material. Give me a few high school guys that you think will be stars on the next level, or guys to that everybody will know at the next level.
All right. Let me think about this. He plays at a rival high school, and I might catch some flack for saying his name, but Deshaun Harris-Smith at Paul VI, he's about 6'3", rising sophomore. He's just a dog. He's just an absolute pit bull with the basketball, getting to the paint, finishing. When they played IMG up at our place for Team Takeover, our Separation Sports Tournament, the Hoop Fest, he tried to dunk on Mark Williams and he almost landed it as a freshman. So I just really like his competitiveness. He's going to be a nightmare to play it against the next couple years. Another one is Caleb Williams, plays at Sidwell, freshman guard. He's already 6'4", 6'5". Just really smart with the basketball. You can tell that he comes from a basketball family. So his father, Kyle Williams, works for Sidwell and also Team Takeover. He's their grassroots guy. He's been coming up through the system, and you can just tell because he's just so fundamentally sound, really hard worker, pretty quiet, seems like a good kid. Another one from our rival. I mean, I had to give you another WCAC guy, but Christian Watson at St. John's blew up a bit this summer as far as the offers go. Got some high major ones. He's 6'5". I hear he's almost 6'6" now. Wing, 2022. Really aggressive and getting after it, getting up on ball screens and cutting off drives to the paint. The offensive game, it's coming along. I saw him play when he was an 8th grader. I believe a 7th grader as well. So it's progressed a bit, but his defense is going to be his calling card for sure. And then the last one, there was a kid, Mike Myrie, that transferred from the Baltimore area down to North Mecklenburg High School, Charlotte, North Carolina. Just really, really aggressive in the paint, getting to the rim, finishing, really athletic guard. I think he can be really solid. Doesn't have any Division I offers, and most of the scouts that I know in the area just don't understand it. Seems like a good kid too. North Mech is a public school, so it's interesting that you'd move states away and go to the public school in the area. But I'm not sure as far as how it works down in that area. I don't really know all that much about North Mecklenburg, honestly. So let's, I'm sure you got some names too. Let's see what.
Yeah. So I just put out the first batch of guys that I saw. I try to get across the country. I've got people like you on the ground who slide me some names, and I've tried to stay 2021, 2022, just because those guys were the most up against the wall with how their schedules worked.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one I got is Brandon Razor Moore. He's like a 6'3", 2'3" out of Jeffersonville, Indiana. Plays for Louisville Magic. He's like your prototypical like off guard who can make stuff happen with the ball. Great shooter. At his strength, he went from, I would say, like a guy who had like D2 buzz to, I'm pretty sure he's going to be like a mid-major plus type of guy, just based on how much better he's gotten and how much more consistent he has gotten with the versatility on his jumper. The next one is sort of the reason I did this series. There was a kid who I got some tape from that nobody knew who he was, and like usually we say that like, oh yeah, he doesn't have any, like no one knew this kid's name and couldn't find his name. And I talked to multiple coaches that played his school and said, like, this is a high major kid, like full stop high major kid, 6'6" guy, I'd say like +4, +5 wingspan, goes to Brigden Academy in Maine. And I had to reach out to some international guys who had been trying to figure out where this kid went to in America because he's from Bahrain. His name is Muzamil Amir Mohammed Hamada. Easily high major guy, super energy wing. Was making high-level pick and roll reads, one-handed push passes to the opposite corner when the big showed high. Looked up his FIBA stats, and he's a plus shooter, across 2-point, 3-point, and free throw. Easily somebody that, if there were a normal circumstance, would be, up and down ACC offers at the very least, and fully expect him to be a national name soon. Once they get the prep showcases going in the Northeast. 2021 kid, the type of guy that we talked about earlier, the like D2, D1 guy is Jalen Bedford out of Hutto, Texas. He plays for ASAK on the AAU circuit. 6'2" point guard, shoot first guy in terms of his skills. But the thing that jumped out to me and the thing that I think will make him a extremely good college player that drives winning is the energy he plays with. He was playing, major circuit teams in Texas, and he was jumping to try to bang out offensive rebounds and then chasing down if he missed. One of the guys who just came up with the ball multiple times, I watched him take an offensive rebound away from a Big 12 high major wing, probably like a 6'7" kid. He just ripped it out of his hands like, yeah, this is my offensive rebound. Good passer, has some shift to him. And that comes clear on the highlight tapes, but what doesn't come out is just this is the type of kid that I would want on a team if I was a D2 coach. Just be like, oh yeah, we're winning games. Easily a guy I would expect to win 100 games in his college career. The next one's another Northeast kid. Deshaun Gittins goes to Woodstock Academy in Connecticut. I think he plays for NE6 on the UAA circuit. He was a 2021 kid and reclassed into 2022. 6'3", 6'4", off guard, ludicrous speed. There were passes that defenders thought were safe, and he could have probably caught them with the opposite hand. Was an on-ball guy at his Connecticut public school. Had like a couple 50-point games, but is learning how to be like a 2 in college. Which I think is probably like he's going to have on-ball juice just from that. But having the ability to flip between the 1 and the 2 while offering a pressing identity and offering both playmaking and the defensive abilities leads me to believe that like mid-major is the very bottom for him. A kid that again would have a story we've heard 100 times. If people knew, he'd be there's some campuses that would be blowing up his phone. And then the last one is it's outside this range, but it's a kid that I've been watching for a long time now. That's a 2023 guard, AJ Johnson. He's a Fresno kid, but he's down at Taft in Southern California now. If you watch him, you're going to think Jalen Green based on how he moves. He's also from Fresno, worked out with Jalen Green a lot. I'd say like 6'2", 6'3" point guard, and just seeing a young guard that plays with pace. I got taught when I was younger, it's not how fast you can go, it's how fast the defense thinks you're going to go. And nobody ever goes the same pace as him. You think you're going 100%, he's going to go 70. He's going to just squirm by you. They try to match 70, he goes to 30. They match 30, he goes to 0, then to 100. And it's just seeing a kid who's craft focused and plays with that kind of pace is the special type of kid. The shooting is developing, the body's developing. He's obviously a tall point guard. It means you got to be skinny. But this is a guy that it's just life. You never get the tall, like super strong point guards. It's just it's a rare thing. But this is a guy that every time I've seen him, I'm just like, yeah, whatever he's ranking needs to be higher. And that's not necessarily something I check, but it's a kid that LA is going to appreciate. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, that kid can really go. I mean, I saw videos of him. Someone sent me a video of him, a year or two ago, and he's just ahead of his time for sure. I want to add in one name. He had a high major offer list. He actually ended up committing to Miami back in September. But Nizine Poplar.
Booga.
Yeah. 6'4", 6'5", shooting guard, combo guard, whatever you want to call it. 2021 kid out of the Mathematics, Civics, and Sciences Charter School. Wow, that's a mouthful. But man, he can score. He can finish in the paint pretty well. Pretty athletic, sneaky athletic kid, and just the ball handle into his shot is just really, really solid. So, I mean, it sounds like you know him, but I don't really think the general public knows him. What AU team was he on?
I don't actually know. I've only seen his recent stuff, which is
Yeah.
all like
I think it was a non-SHU affiliated team, if memory serves.
Late bloomer special. And those are the guys that you always want to bet on, the ones that like really come out of nowhere. Maybe you're late, I know he's late to the game. And watching people learn in real time is like one of the real blessings of basketball. Is you can go back to somebody's game 3 weeks later and they're like, oh, they were missing that read before, making it now. And seeing those little development happen, even the stuff that I've seen, I've probably seen like 6 or 7 of his games. And each time he's a guy who's learning new things and learning new ways to use his talents on the court. And that's a fun thing to watch. Miami got one.
So he actually plays for Kyle Lowry's team. So
Caleb Elite, nice.
Yeah, that's what I found. So, all right, appreciate the time, brother. This was absolutely fantastic. Anything to plug? Anything to share with the people? Tell them where they can find you on Twitter and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So my Twitter is above the break 3. I do my writing on Patreon, but all the work is free. It's a link in my bio. If you have a couple bucks to spare, greatly appreciate it. If not, everything that you could want to read is on there. I think I have between 15 and 20 of the wing breakdowns, along with my series on guards called The Heuristic, which is, the basic question of what can a guard do simply. That's on 10 of the guards in the 2020 class. I have Slow Feet Don't Eat, which is on bigs, 4 different segments on 8 guys. And then I have the Recruit Review, which I just published the most recent one last week. And then I think I have another one coming out either Saturday or Sunday, depending on how good I am at editing. Work is always free, but if you have anything to spend, it's appreciated. If not, a share of like goes a long way.
Got you. Well, appreciate the time, brother. Definitely keep in touch on the line. All right.
Thank you so much.